Trump finally meets Obama, having sworn to unpick and destroy the president's legacy.
We now are going to want to do everything we can to help you succeed, because if you succeed, then the country succeeds.
He explained some of the difficulties, some of the high-flying assets, and some of the really great things that have been achieved.
Right now, Donald Trump, president-elect, is beneath the great Capitol dome here, meeting the Republican leaders he hopes will enable him to make America great again. Good evening from Washington on a day when the American Constitution has kicked in to try to tame Donald Trump before he's sworn in as president right over there in 71 days' time. The schmoozing has been remorseless, from the charm of Michelle receiving Melania to Obama carrying out his constitutional duty in shaking Trump's hand in the White House. So the man who questioned whether Obama was ever even born an American, declaring him thereby illegal, finally meets the man who he said Donald Trump was unsuited ever to be president. The pictures of the event designed to ease the transition from the filth of the campaign toward the elegance of power.
No sign of schmoozing here in New York City, Donald Trump's hometown, where thousands of people demonstrated overnight, as they did in 36 other cities, and thousands more are due to demonstrate at the weekend.
We reject the president-elect. Donald Trump, go away. Donald Trump has got to go.
And we talked to one of America's biggest bands. Famously anti-Trump, Green Day's anger at his electoral success is as visceral as is their music.
He came out as the anti-Obama. It has fascist overtones, if not straight-up fascism.
Also tonight, police name one of the victims of yesterday's tram crash in South London. 19-year-old Dane Chinnery was one of 7 people killed after the tram derailed in Croydon. And the president-elect speaks to Theresa May. The UK is very special, he says, but how will his plans for trade transform America's relationship with Britain and the rest of the world?
It was an extraordinary meeting. 2 men who have spent years using each other as metaphorical punch bags. Never elected to anything ever before, Donald Trump is moving between the seats of US political power right here in Washington tonight, bearing an agenda both brutal and short. The ripping up of Obama's legacy, from health care to the nuclear deal with Iran, from staunching immigration to deserting all efforts to combat climate change. He's meeting the Republican leaders in Congress who owe him for the bounce he gave their own election campaigns. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris has tonight's first report on the Trump supremacy.
Donald Trump is temperamentally unfit to be commander-in-chief.
Going to go down as one of the worst presidents in the history of this country. He has been a disaster.
You know, it's bad enough being arrogant. It's bad being arrogant and not knowing anything.
It was wheels down in Washington for Trump Force One when the man President Obama traded insults with arrived to pick up the keys to the White House. To call it a seismic shift doesn't quite do it justice. This is what it looks like when 2 worlds collide. The meeting was scheduled to last 15 minutes, but President-elect Trump and President Obama spoke for an hour and a half.
Well, I just had the opportunity to have an excellent conversation with President-elect Trump. My #1 priority in the coming 2 months is to try to facilitate a transition that ensures our president-elect is successful. And I believe that it is important for all of us, regardless of party and regardless of political preferences, to now come together, work together, to deal with the many challenges that we face. And most of all, I want to emphasize to you, Mr. President-elect, that we now are going to want to do everything we can to help you succeed, because if you succeed, then the country succeeds.
Please.
Well, thank you very much, President Obama. This was a meeting that was going to last for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and we were just going to get to know each other. We had never met each other. I have great respect. The meeting lasted for almost an hour and a half, and it could have, as far as I'm concerned, it could have gone on for a lot longer. We really, we discussed a lot of different situations, some wonderful and some difficulties. I very much look forward to dealing with the president in the future, including counsel. He explained some of the difficulties, some of the high-flying assets, and some of the really great things that have been achieved. So, Mr. President, it was a great honor being with you, and I look forward to being with you many, many more times in the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody. We are not going to take any questions.
Do you have a message?
Thank you.
Do you offer any advice?
That's a good rule. Don't answer the questions when they just start yelling.
It's hard to hear, but President Obama shares a top tip: don't answer questions when they just start yelling. A magnanimous gesture by the president and an artful display from a professional deal maker. After all, when Trump assumes office, one of his first plays will likely be the dismembering of what President Obama wanted to be his greatest legacy, the Affordable Health Care Act. Then perhaps his other triumph, the Iran deal. While they spoke, Obama's Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, strolled the South Lawn with Ivanka Trump's husband, Jared Kushner. All very civilized and peaceful, but a sharp contrast to what happened last night all over the United States. While this first meeting in Washington promised a smooth transition, protests across the country reflect a turbulent mood on the streets. Visceral anger, even grief, at the choice of Donald Trump, who presents such a contrast to the America shaped by Barack Obama.
And Kylie joins me now. Kylie, so far so good, so bad?
Well, the meeting was immensely important, I think, in order to kind of set the tone for this transition. And it was amicable, slightly stilted, though. In fact, the White House spokesman has just come out with some new lines to describe the meeting. He said that the pair did not relitigate their differences in the Oval Office, adding that we're on to the next phase now. So I think that is the sense here that people, there is the shock of this election result to be dealt with, but at the same time, we're all professionals, we're all moving on. I think that's the message that the White House is trying to send. We know that Melania Trump and Michelle Obama have also met, they've had lunch. So there is a real sense of civility around this currently. As well as that, of course, there are massively important top-level meetings happening within the Republican Party itself, the newly empowered Republican Party that is going to hold both houses and the White House. So immensely significant policy discussions about, Donald Trump has been promising to build walls, to introduce new immigration policy, to tear apart Obamacare, the Affordable Health Act. Can he do that? And will he bring the party with him? Will the party have its way? I think there is a hope from some Republicans that he will kind of be a delegator in chief, that he is a businessman, that is his specialty, and that he will seek out people within the party who will achieve the kinds of policy aims that he's been talking about. There is also a sense that he needs to build some bridges. I mean, remember, there are lots of people within the Republican Party who actually rejected Donald Trump, who refused to endorse him. He's now having lunch with some of those people. Paul Ryan, who tried to take distance from him. I mean, there are a massive kind of tectonic plate shifting around the politics of this town in a way that we've really never seen previously. I mean, he is the real deal. He is a proper outsider, and he's really, given people a shock here, I think. So it's an extraordinary moment, and every 24 hours I feel like we're getting new detail about what the future of this presidency will be.
Kylie Morris. Well, now with me is Adam Hodge. He's the communications director for the Democratic National Committee, who's previously worked as a senior aide to Democrats up there on Capitol Hill.
That's right.
Adam, let me just read you a tweet here from Bernie Sanders. If Donald Trump takes people's anger and turns it against women, African Americans, and immigrants, we will be his worst nightmare. It's all very well being a nightmare, but can you stop Donald Trump if he starts to unwind your president's legacy?
Well, John, that's our number one objective from the start of his administration. We, of course, believe in a very cordial transfer of power. but as the loyal opposition, we have a responsibility to continue fighting for the policies and the values that that our party holds dear, that we fought for in this campaign. We came up a little bit short. We actually won the popular vote. More Americans voted for Hillary Clinton than voted for Mr. Trump, and we're going to continue fighting for those values. We'll work with him on some of the issues where there is agreement, but we certainly intend to hold him accountable for the promises he made on the campaign.
But to people outside America, it's very hard to see how a party that has not gained any seats effectively is really going to be able to block things. I mean, what are the mechanics of actually being able to use that place to save your president's legacy?
Well, we actually did pick up 2 seats in the United States Senate, elected some really great leaders who will be those forceful defenders of the president's legacy. But really the onus is on Mr. Trump. He said that we would have to, he was going to repeal Obamacare. That means 20 million Americans could be without health care if he follows through. We're going to hold him accountable for that.
Iran deal?
He's talked about getting rid of the Iran deal. We fought for that Iran deal because we thought it was important that Iran had fewer nuclear weapons.
But it hangs on Obama's presidential power.
And the job of the Democratic Party, but the job of the Democratic Party is to defend the president's legacy and continue explaining the tough choices and the possible consequences for those actions.
In the 2 months you've got left, is there enough time in there to do things that might lock these things into?
I think my honest assessment is that those probably going to be very little done over the next couple months. And once the Congress comes back in January, they're going to pursue their agenda. Our responsibility is to hold them accountable and to continue fighting for the values and the things that hold our party dear. And we'll get them the next time at the ballot box.
Final question, a quick one. Are you depressed?
It was definitely a sad couple mornings, but as I'm reminded, my father told me as a young kid, the sun will rise again. We'll continue fighting for the policies, and we'll win the next one.
Thank you very much indeed.
That was a pleasure.
Adam Hodge, very kind. Well, now Donald Trump's surprise victory sparked protests right across America last night, most dramatically in New York, where thousands of anti-Trump demonstrators marched on the billionaire businessman's Manhattan base, Trump Tower, chanting, "Not my president." Matt Fry joins us live now from New York. Matt.
Well, John, there were demonstrations overnight here in New York, thousands of people. There were demonstrations in, I think, 35 other American cities, and there are more planned for the weekend. And one of the things that you hear from the demonstrators over and over again is the reminder that actually in the popular vote, it was Hillary Clinton who won by a margin of something like 220,000 at the last count. Now, this is a rather ironic reflection of the past because, of course, that's exactly what happened in 2000 when Al Gore also won the popular vote but then lost because of the Florida recount and he lost the electoral college. Now, here's the key thing. If you look at all the statistics, Hillary Clinton did not do nearly as well as we thought amongst voters that she was counting on, like women, like Latino voters. And this makes a mockery of the whole Democratic Party get-out-the-vote machine that was so fabled before the election. Donald Trump got exactly the same number of votes as Mitt Romney did in 2012, and that, together with the Electoral College, was enough for him to end up in the White House. But it has left the country very divided. Watch.
We reject the president-elect! We reject the president-elect! We reject the president-elect!
Somewhere up there, in the glass tower that bears his name, President-elect Donald Trump must now be contemplating the America that he's been elected to run. 75 floors below, on Fifth Avenue, the chorus of discontent.
We reject the president-elect!
Trump Tower has become a fortress. Cops line the streets and sanitation trucks filled with sand are Trump's very own wall.
I bet you Donald Trump never expected this sort of scene outside his front door when he was running for office. But this is now the new reality for him. I'm sure it's something that he finds on one level quite flattering, but also quite alarming because it does show you that half the country simply does not accept him as their president.
I'm disgraced by him. I'm repulsed by him.
And what does it tell you that he got elected and you're protesting against him? I mean, it tells you how divided this country is, right?
Yeah, it's really horrifying. I had no idea. I mean, I had an idea that this much hatred existed, but I didn't believe it to be the majority.
I think we're two countries under one roof, and that's a very scary thing. But I think when a country built on hate is the one that takes over, then we have a problem.
On Fifth Avenue, the Christmas lights somehow lack conviction these days. And even though the protesters own the street, the Trump voters own the power.
I wanted change, just like everybody wanted change when we had Barack Obama come into office. I know there's been a little uproars, but look at the age. If you look at the ages out here, there's not 50-year-olds protesting, 40-year-olds. There's not even 30-year-olds protesting out here. So this is a different type of voter that is just newly on scene, that I feel like that they feel like they're entitled to do this when they didn't get their way.
Yeah. Bad losers?
Sore losers.
If you remain in the roadway and refuse to utilize the sidewalk, you will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly conduct. This is the New York City Police Department.
The dulcet tones of RoboCop. I have a feeling that he'll be with us for some time. Last night, thousands marched in New York. Dozens were arrested. Everyone here is bracing for a winter of discontent and some questions. Will the police stay neutral? Will the losing side end up respecting the result of the election? Will Donald Trump be able to reach out to his opponents? The agonizing aftermath of a vote that has divided the nation. At least in Britain, we can say, been there, doing that. The demonstrators are impatient to make their voices heard. In the basement of a Manhattan hotel, the people now preparing for power are impatient to reboot America.
You're a wanted man.
Hello.
Hello.
Stephen Moore is busy since yesterday. He's helping to run the Trump transition.
Look, the American people want Donald Trump to succeed. They do. They want an agenda.
All of them?
Well, I
don't think so.
Look, most Americans just want more jobs, more growth. Every single poll in this country for the last 3 years has shown one thing. What do Americans care most about? The economy and jobs, and they're financially stressed out. It's been 10 years since the average American has seen a pay raise. You know, if you live in Washington, D.C., or you live in New York City, or you live in Silicon Valley, you're doing great.
But not beyond this skyline in Trump's new heartland. The metropolitan elite versus the rest. That story too is a familiar one. But in America, this drama unfolds on a much bigger stage, with consequences for all of us.
And to see more of Matt's interview with Stephen Moore, tune in to The World According to President Trump, a Dispatches special this Saturday on Channel 4, 9:30 in the evening. Build that wall became a battle cry at Trump rallies. He called Mexicans rapists and drug dealers and threatened to send 11 million undocumented migrants home. Few policies have been as contentious as Donald Trump's plans to deal with immigration, especially that of Hispanic migrants, who make up almost a fifth of the U.S. population. We sent our Latin America correspondent, Guillermo Galdos, to California to get some reactions to Donald Trump's election.
These days, the Golden State feeds a nation. California grows almost half the fruit and vegetables consumed in the U.S., harvested mostly by Latino workers. And for the Hispanic population of over 40%, there is much fear now of the new commander-in-chief.
Mucho gusto. Bien, bien. ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo viste las elecciones de ayer?
Pues no sé, está muy crítica la situación, ¿verdad?
Sí, ¿ah? ¿Te lo esperabas o no?
La verdad no.
¿No te lo esperabas?
Pero pues ya lo que pasa, ¿eh?
Y que dime una cosa, ¿te genera miedo la situación?
Un poco, porque yo aquí crecí. I was raised here, you know.
You were raised here?
I went to school here and everything.
Wow.
I mean, but I don't have papers, you know. I was born in Mexico, but I came when I was young, you know. I was 8 years old. I didn't have a choice to come, you know. My parents came, I came. I want to see Donald Trump come do his job, see if we can handle this shit, you know. See, I ain't no rapist, I ain't no gangbanger, I ain't nothing, you know. I'm a worker, just like, you know, everybody right here.
Trump's plan for mass deportations could divide millions of families.
Lo peor que le puede pasar es que lo manden de vuelta a su casa.
Pues póngale que sí, porque se quedan los hijos sin papás, de nomás.
¿Y sus hijos se quedarían acá?
Sí, porque ya son todos nacidos aquí.
Esos ya son americanos.
Es lo pensamiento de uno, ¿verdad?
O sea, separaría millones de familias.
Regardless of their immigration status, many Latinos across the United States today feel that there is no space for them in Trump's America. All those dreams of working hard and one day becoming a U.S. citizen have vanished for many of them. Some will not even wait to find out.
¿Y usted qué piensa de que el pueblo americano haya elegido a una persona como Donald Trump para que sea su presidente?
Para mí, los que dieron su voto fueron tarugos. Yo a ratito me voy para mi tierra. Ya no regreso. ¿Por qué?
Just before we came on air, I spoke to Lena Epstein. She is the co-chair of the Trump campaign in the state of Michigan, which was so crucial to Donald Trump's victory yesterday morning, and also to Jonathan Capehart. He's a commentator with the Washington Post. I asked Lena Epstein what white, blue-collar workers in Michigan want from Donald Trump.
They want a clear sign that America has a brighter future. The middle class is ready for change, and that is why Donald Trump has been elected president. And the change that they want to see is a few things, John. They want to see greater opportunities for their children. They want to see greater opportunities professionally and income-wise. They want to see safer borders. They want to know that their homes are going to be safe and that the values of their homes are going to be maintained. They want to know that America, the manufacturing hub of the world that it once was, will become the manufacturing hub once again. The middle class has spoken up, and they have elected Donald Trump to be our next president.
There is the desire, but what are the facts? What can he do? Infrastructure, what can deliver the scale of jobs that you're talking about?
Sure, absolutely. While he's going to assist businesses and make the entire corporate structure stronger by eliminating an intense amount of regulation that inhibits growth for businesses, this will allow companies to be stronger, to hire more people at higher wages.
But Lena, one of the things which Mrs. Clinton said she would do was to pour money into infrastructure. Doesn't Michigan need infrastructure? Wouldn't that be a great way to generate jobs?
And Mr. Trump has also built that into his plan. The first 100-day document does include a great deal of infrastructure investment across the entire country, not just the Midwest. And I think what's really important, John, to remember is that we have now elected Mr. Trump as our president. And it is hard for some people to accept. And I greatly respect the Clinton campaign for everything that they did to try to elect her. Today and tomorrow and the day after that, this is about unifying America. There are a lot of people that are hurting. There are a lot of people that are struggling. And we have been a country divided for a long time, well over a year, 2 years. And I think the conversation we need to be having right now is, how is Mr. Trump going to rebuild the country? How is he going to bring us back together? And I think when we start with that fundamental question, then we can talk certainly about the economy and jobs and schools and safety. Everything will come as America reunites. I think it's important for certain people to grieve, the Clinton supporters to grieve, and those that are not going to have the country move in their direction, but in a broader direction. I think that's okay.
Well, now, Jonathan Capehart, I think that Lena Epstein is in fact reaching out to you as someone who grieves. I suspect you are grieving.
Sure.
Do you feel reached out to, and to what extent can you identify with what she is talking about in terms of jobs?
Well, first off, if other people within the camp of President-elect Donald Trump speaks in the sort of warm and open, welcoming way that Ms. Epstein is speaking, then I think we are off to a great start. But the problem here is people aren't just grieving the loss of Hillary Clinton, of the presidency. What they're grieving is for their future. President-elect Donald Trump ran on a campaign that called for the deportation of 11 million undocumented immigrants, including their American-born children. Donald Trump campaigned on banning all Muslims from the United States and then revised it to banning Muslims from terrorist areas like France or Belgium. You have people, American citizens who are of Hispanic descent, Muslim descent, now wondering what is their place in their own country and how is the incoming president going to treat them. Now, as to Ms. Epstein's discussion about jobs, she was very general in terms of President-elect Donald Trump's economic plan. The only place where she got specific was on infrastructure. And luckily, it is on infrastructure where Democrats and Republicans can come together to actually implement a program and a plan that will, as Ms. Epstein said, get people back to work all across the country, while at the same time improving the nation's infrastructure, which everyone knows needs improvement.
Can I ask you one last question? You are a gay, black Washington Post columnist and much celebrated. Is this your America? Are you worried that it may become another America?
That is a very powerful question, John, and it moves me almost into silence because the election of President Obama was a great moment for this country. And now we stand 2 months away from all of that disappearing. And as an African American, as an openly gay man, and as an American, that frightens me.
Lena, did you hear that? Can you give Jonathan Capehart some sort of reassurance that this is his America, just as it is your America?
I did.
You know Donald Trump.
Yes, John, let me address what you said, because my heart goes out to you. And I want to assure you, from my personal experience with Mr. Trump, that he is a good man, that he is a capable man, and that he cares about all Americans, including you and your community. And as someone who will be in his corner going forward, I will be very careful to advocate and be sure that that is the case. And I'm sorry that I can feel your pain, and I'm with you. And I know that a lot of
Lena,
people are scared.
Thank you. Indeed, let me just put that back to you. Do you get any comfort from what she said?
I've had the occasion to meet then just regular citizen Donald Trump. I've interviewed Donald Trump in his office. The man I met, this was after the whole birther controversy. The man I met
about whether Obama was
an American citizen and therefore legitimately president of the United States. He was warm, he was charming, he was engaging. The man who ran for president over the last 15 months is not that man, and that is why I and so many people are afraid, and that's why I and so many people are praying for this nation.
Jonathan Capehart, Lena Epstein, thank you both very, very warmly indeed. I confess I found that particular interview very humbling. Bad people, that's what Mr. Trump called us reporters last week, bad people. Don't trust them, they tell lies. Well, just now, following his meeting with Republican leaders under that dome over there, he's been talking to us. And here's a little bit of what he had to say.
In fact, truthfully, we can't get started fast enough. And whether it's healthcare or immigration, so many different things. We'll be working on them very rapidly, and I think we'll be putting things up pretty quickly. So we had a very good meeting, a very detailed meeting, and we're going to lower taxes, as you know, and we're going to fix healthcare and make it more affordable and better. And we're going to do a real job for the public, and that's what we want to do, and that's why we're excited.
Well, now, we'll be back a little later in this programme, but for now, let's go to Jackie Long in London for more of the day's news. Jackie.
Thank you, John. British Transport Police say 6 men and 1 woman were killed in yesterday's tram crash in South London. The tram derailed as it took a corner at speed. The driver, who was arrested on suspicion of manslaughter, has been released on bail. Our reporter Porrick O'Brien is in Croydon this evening. Porrick.
Well, Jackie, just to update you on what we've learned in Croydon today, as you said, 6 men and 1 woman lost their lives when that tram derailed just down the bottom of the street where I'm standing here. Also, as you said, the driver who was arrested yesterday released on bail today. And although there's been lots of talk around here about the speed that tram was going at the time, Transport for London and the investigators anxious to emphasise that they are still exploring lots of different possibilities here. But also people that were actually on that tram are talking and painting a really quite nightmarish scenario of what happened in the immediate aftermath of this terrible incident. Framed in the darkness of a tunnel, the bend in the track, the undercarriage of a tram, the forensic tent. This side of the darkness, the morning commute. The other side, a community mourning. Up track, the tram tossed on its side like something from a child's train set. And the terrible toll. As of lunchtime today, confirmation that 7 people have lost their lives. 8 people are in a life-threatening or serious condition, and a total of over 50 people are injured. Tom Dale was on the tram when it went off the track. His friend, 19-year-old Dane Chinnery, was sitting opposite him and lost his life.
Genuine lad, he was there for everyone really. Tried to be there and help people out as much as he could. When I woke up, I was like, where's Dane? I can't find him. I don't know where he is. And all that was there on where he was sitting was his boot.
Today we also learned that passengers just in the last few weeks have registered concern with authorities around the speed that the tram goes around that particular bend in the track. This, for example, from a Facebook page of a local passenger.
30 of us on the tram this morning, and we all thought our time was up. The tram driver took the hard corner to Sandilands at 40 miles per hour. Everyone's still shaking.
And we understand that he's not the only passenger to complain to officials about this.
What I am really keen to do is make sure that my staff speak to him.
You've read the entry so that you know that he complained about a speeding tram here just a week ago and talked about fearing for his life and stuff.
In which case he's a witness, in which case he has important information which will go in the investigation, and we'll get more information in due course.
It is of course far too early to speculate about what happened, and regular speed spot checks are done on this line. This is point-of-view footage of a tram taking the bend in question. Note how slowly it takes the corner. The speed limit goes from 80 kilometers an hour to just 20 kilometers an hour for this particular bend in the track. Whatever the reasons behind what happened, something particularly raw and sad about something as ordinary as the early morning commute, ending with something so tragic.
Porrick O'Brien reporting there. The Court of Appeal has ruled that the NHS in England does have the power to fund a drug which prevents HIV infection in people at high risk. NHS England had claimed that local authorities should provide the pre-exposure prophylaxis drug known as PrEP because they are responsible for preventative health. The ruling opens the way for men whose sexual partners have HIV to be given the drug by the NHS.
There's a huge amount of evidence that shows how effective it can be. If used properly, it pretty much prevents people from catching HIV, and if used in combination with other prevention tools like condoms, like regular testing and using treatment in people who are positive, it could make a massive difference, a huge reduction potentially of HIV transmissions in this country.
A girl and boy, both now 15, have both been sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in detention for murdering a mother and daughter in their beds. Elizabeth and Katie Edwards were smothered and stabbed while they slept at home in Spalding, Lincolnshire last April. With winter arriving, the United Nations says it's distributing the last available food rations for 250,000 Syrians in the besieged eastern half of Aleppo. The UN has proposed a humanitarian plan to deliver food and medical supplies and get access for health workers. Russian bombing raids on the city have been suspended for the last 3 weeks. Now, it was only a phone call, but if Downing Street is to be believed, it was also something close to a love-in when Theresa May got to speak to President-elect Donald Trump this afternoon. He told her the UK was a very, very special place for him and invited her to visit him at the White House as soon as possible after his inauguration. It all augurs well for a post-Brexit trade deal, and with markets still rising since his election, the economic signs are looking good. But can it last? Here's our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy.
This is what you get for backing Donald Trump. Angry owners of New Balance trainers flushed, binned and burned their sneakers in protest after the American footwear giant dared back the president-elect. The financial markets also got behind him. The Dow Jones opened at its highest level ever this morning, a million miles from the doom-laden world predicted just 48 hours ago.
Day two of Trump and a sea of green across global markets as investors cling to any positive news they can, tax breaks to come and billions to be spent on infrastructure. But what these markets aren't focusing on right now are the president-elect's future trade policies, which, were he to enact them, would likely change these screens from green to red.
Take his stance on NAFTA, the decades-old trade deal between the US, Canada and Mexico.
One of the worst economic deals ever made by
Trump has repeatedly slammed the deal as a failure. Now he'll renegotiate or terminate it altogether. He's similarly scathing of the planned trade deal between the US and 11 Pacific nations.
The TPP, as it's known, would be the death blow for American manufacturing.
Controversially, New Balance agreed with Trump today, fearing a trade deal could undercut US brands. It said,
"The Obama administration turned a deaf ear to us, and frankly, with President-elect Trump, we feel things are going to move in the right direction."
A massive corporate endorsement for Trump, who throughout his campaign targeted blue-collar workers and industries that he says got left behind by the dual forces of capitalism and globalization. But all of that would pale in comparison to Trump's plans to slap tariffs on China, its biggest trading partner.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing.
Trump is threatening to hit Chinese goods like cheap steel with a 45% tariff. That could spark a vicious trade war, even a global recession. In London today for talks with Chancellor Philip Hammond, the Chinese Vice Premier kicked off the verbal war, dismissing Trump's comments as rhetoric to win the election. He'd better be right.
When you put up trade barriers, the first impact of that would be the trade volumes would go down. That would mean that there's lower economic activity because that world trade now is missing. It's not there in the world economy anymore. So what that would mean for investments is that businesses are going to want to invest less. There are going to be fewer jobs from this reduction in economic activity. And the same goods which earlier were being freely traded are now going to be more expensive.
If there's one glimmer of hope, it's that Trump seems more open to a potential trade deal between the US and a post-Brexit Britain. In between meetings with the Chinese delegation today, Theresa May spoke to Donald Trump for the first time and stressed she wanted to strengthen bilateral trade. He strongly agreed.
We will never, ever sign bad trade deals.
But if the president-elect doesn't agree with free trade globally and carries out his promises of tariffs, barriers and protectionism, then Britain and the global economy are set to suffer.
Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Neil Ferguson, who's Professor of History at Stanford University, and we were joined from Athens by the economist and former Greek Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. I began by asking Neil Ferguson whether Trump could deliver for the so-called forgotten American people.
Well, the stock market thinks he's going to deliver something, and if you look at what Trump was proposing, for example, in the speech he gave at the Economic Club of New York, it's massive fiscal stimulus, in the sense that he wants to spend on infrastructure and defense and cut taxes. This is exactly what Keynesian economists like Paul Krugman and Larry Summers have been calling for years. So the joke will rather be on them if he does it and it works. I don't think they expected Keynesian policies to come from an arch populist.
Yanis Varoufakis, he talks about remembering the left behind. It's not far off the message you took to the people of Greece. You must be pleased to see a new American president talking about those people.
It's a poison chalice of sorts, Jackie, because let us not forget that Benito Mussolini also appealed to the forgotten people of Italy, as did Adolf Hitler. What we took to the Greek people was a very sensible, very moderate proposal that we just end a debt deflationary cycle that sunk our nation further into debt bondage. We did not propose deficit spending. May I correct something that was said before? I don't like defending Larry Summers very much, but it's not true that Larry Summers or even Paul Krugman would propose tax cuts simultaneously with a fiscal stimulus. the whole point about the New Deal kind of approach is to mobilize idle savings and put them into work in the form of investments.
And
but going back to the main problem.
The idea that you're allying Mr. Trump to Mussolini and Hitler will be very offensive to a lot of people.
Well, I'm not in the business of stroking the ego of my audience. That has always been one of my problems. The problem is this. 2008 was our generation's 1929. Just like 1929 began in Wall Street, 2008 was marked by a huge financial crisis. We had the fragmentation of the global monetary system that followed both after 1929 and 2008, particularly in Europe with the euro, but not just in Europe. And very soon after that, the inept handling of the crisis by the establishment, the Weimar Republic back then, the liberal globalized establishment today, causes great deflation. And the great deflation breeds monsters.
Neil Ferguson.
Let me try and put Mr. Varoufakis right on a couple of things. He's an economist, not a historian, so he's easily confused by historical analogies. The first thing to notice is that economists like Krugman and Summers have been calling now for a long time for large-scale deficit finance. That's what they're going to get from Donald Trump. It doesn't matter, really, whether it comes from increased spending or tax cuts. In fact, it's going to come from both. The second point, which is really important for your viewers, is that this is not the 1930s. We did not have 1929. The economic consequences of the financial crisis were far, far more limited in the world as a whole. They were bad for Greece, but Greece is a small country. The United States long ago recovered from the financial crisis. It's almost at full employment right now. This is populism, not fascism, and comparing Trump with Mussolini or Hitler, I think, is absurd. And indeed, most of the people who turned out and voted for Trump on November the 8th rejected that analogy. They could see it wasn't right. There is some nastiness, no doubt, on the periphery of the so-called alt-right, a great deal of nastiness, and I've encountered it as a Trump critic. But it's not the mainstream, it's not the really the essence of what won him this election.
Yanis Varoufakis, I mean, this was, everybody suggests, people sticking two fingers up to the political elite. And I mean, surely that's something that you recognise.
That's what the masses were doing in the 1930s. Professor Ferguson, I'm sure, will agree with me that an economist who is ahistorical in his approach is very dangerous in pronouncing in economic policies, as is a historian who does not understand economic theory. So I think that we can dispense with disciplinary boundaries and get to the bottom of the situation.
I think we're rather missing the central point here of what the Trump presidency means, because while the economic policy is important, I think the big changes are going to come in foreign policy. And here the analogy completely breaks down with the 1930s, because the thing that Donald Trump has said he's most eager to do is to go to Moscow and have a meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, whom he seems greatly to admire. And I think if you want to try and understand what the knock-on consequences of Trump will be for the world, it's not really economic policy should focus on, it's foreign policy. Donald Trump questioned the utility of NATO during the election campaign. He threw East Asia policy up in the air by suggesting that potentially American allies could have nuclear weapons. He's threatened a trade war with China, to say nothing of a trade war with Mexico. That's really what's important here. And again, I don't think it's convincing to draw analogies to the 1930s when fascist leaders envisage actual war, not trade war.
Yanis Varoufakis, I mean, how far do you think, you know, Mr. Trump talks about a movement. How far do you think this movement goes? What does this mean for relationships with Europe, for example?
Trump's success, there is no doubt, is going to fuel the Alternative für Deutschland, its chances in Germany, Le Pen in France, Golden Dawn here in Greece. We are facing a spectre of a nationalist international, which is totally unorganized, thankfully, but which may become an extremely clear and present danger for the West.
Neil Ferguson and Yanis Varoufakis, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, but thank you both very much for joining us. Thank you.
After the break, more from here in Washington, and we'll be hearing from one of America's biggest rock bands, Green Day, about their reaction to Donald Trump's election.
multi-award-winning American band Green Day have never been shy of expressing their political views, from American Idiot, about dysfunction in American society and the rise of George Bush, to their new album, Revolution Radio, which speaks of chaos in America. So how do they feel about Donald Trump becoming their new president? I went to meet them earlier.
Do you have the time to listen to me whine about nothing and everything all at once?
It was in the mid-90s that Green Day propelled themselves onto the world stage with their brand of self-reflective punk rock music. The band, fronted by Billie Joe Armstrong, has sold over 75 million records worldwide. Their 2004 record, American Idiot, expressed the disillusionment of a generation which grew up alongside world-changing events like the Iraq War. Now releasing their 12th album, Revolution Radio, and back on tour, they're more fired up than ever about the state of America.
I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on. I think a lot of people have been manipulated. I think...
By whom, though?
I think Trump, when he came out with his campaign, he came out as the anti-Obama. It has fascist overtones, if not straight up fascism. And I think he blames, he blames Mexicans and he blames Muslims. He wasn't called out on all of his faults and his problems, and the media kind of treated this whole thing like it's a reality TV show, because that's the kind of person he is. That's the kind of campaign he wanted to run. I think people kind of got caught up in the game show aspect of the most serious job that someone could have on the planet.
I mean, one of your most successful tracks, American Idiot, speaks about alienation. I mean, do you get that this is also about alienation? Do you accept that this is about people who feel desperate for change?
I feel like the Republican Party has turned into a white nationalist party. I think when people are uneducated and they don't really have, they're not really reading into the bigger issue, I think they tend to want to have someone to shove, especially like a lot of white working class people. They want someone to blame if they don't have a job. So the way that Trump framed his argument was Mexicans are after your job. You know, Muslims are coming to kill you. And that's who ended up being the biggest scapegoat. That's who I feel worse for than anybody else.
But what about that core of, you call them white uneducated people, and many people say that they're fed up of being called uneducated or stupid, and that's why they're voting for Trump.
I am an uneducated person. I don't have a high school diploma. You know, I found my freedom through punk rock music, and I felt like that was the first time I was getting an education. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I do know that Donald Trump is not the answer either.
What do you think America under President Trump is going to look like?
Just scary to think about, because I feel like Barack Obama stood for something. He had compassion, and he was trying to do the right thing. And the conservatives basically blocked him at every avenue that he was trying to make. You know, not that I have my issues with Barack Obama too, but he's a hell of a lot better than Donald Trump.
And what about the idea that Hillary Clinton just didn't speak to enough of those people who felt disaffected?
She probably could have been a good president. There was too many issues of her not revealing herself, and there wasn't enough transparency. So people got caught up in her being a liar, which I don't know. Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. But so all I know is there's a lot of confused people right now, and everybody's a little frightened.
It's a time of momentous change. Do you anticipate that affecting the direction you take with your music?
We're just excited to get back on the road, because there's been a lot of people anticipating us to come back out.
It'd be good to get out on the road and give people a reason to get into a room and sing with unity, and actually, you know, have one night of celebration that's, you know, maybe an escape from all the other crap that's going on in the world right now.
Green Day, out on the road. And we're on the road too and enjoying it. Tonight's main news from here in Washington: Barack Obama has welcomed Donald Trump both to the White House, where the two men shook hands and exchanged pleasantries and slurs, and insults of the presidential election campaign were temporarily laid aside to fulfill the constitutional niceties.
We now are going to want to do everything we can to help you succeed, because if you succeed, then the country succeeds.
He explained some of the difficulties, some of the high-flying assets, and some of the really great things that have been achieved.
We're joined again now by our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris. Kylie, take us through these extraordinary events today.
Well, I think there is an excitement generally that the two men were able to present such a kind of politic and generally friendly presence after this all-important meeting. I think what I'm learning today is it's amazing how winning brings people together. And talking to contacts within the Republican Party, if you think about Paul Ryan for a moment, Speaker of the House, until today the senior-most Republican in this town, during the campaign he lambasted Trump. He was very critical. He refused to defend Trump when the kind of groping tape was presented and we found out more about historic aspects, I suppose Trump supporters would argue, of President-elect Trump's attitudes toward women. But Paul Ryan today had lunch with President-elect Trump. All of those differences are quickly being shoved aside. And I think there is a real sense about the transactional nature of politics. Let's hear a little bit of what that meeting, how that meeting ended.
In fact, truthfully, we can't get started fast enough. And whether it's healthcare or immigration, so many different things. We'll be working on them very rapidly, and I think we'll be putting things up pretty quickly. So we had a very good meeting, a very detailed meeting, and we're going to lower taxes, as you know, and we're going to fix healthcare and make it more affordable and better. And we're going to do a real job for the public, and that's what we want to do, and that's why we're excited.
So behind these and beyond these meetings and the kind of behind-the-scenes meetings that are going on, there is lots of jockeying for positions in the Trump cabinet. You know, will Ben Carson, a man who believes that Joseph built the pyramids, potentially be the education secretary? Will Rudy Giuliani become an attorney general? And what about Kellyanne Conway, his spokeswoman? She's already bragging on Twitter of a White House job. Now, we know that he likes loyalty, but he also likes retribution. So that's making some people here nervous. I think we have new footage, which I should mention. It's a very presidential-style exit from Donald Trump, hand in hand with his wife, Melania, leaving Capitol Hill. Now, I know it's hard to drag your eyes from the Future First couple, but if you look at the face of the man in the blue tie to Trump's right, that is Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. Now, he is smiling. I've been here for nearly 3 years covering the Capitol. I have never seen him smile before. I mean, not every Republican loves Donald Trump, but they love what he has given them.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, we were talking earlier in a very emotional interview with a columnist from the Washington, black, gay, Jonathan Capehart, and he said, I've met Trump, I've talked to him, he was charming, he was delightful. Could that man become president, leaving this ghastly filth behind?
I think there is uncertainty about that. I think that's part of what's scaring people, is that you see, or making people nervous, that you see the Trump that we recognise from the campaign trail and put him next to the man today, and it's very difficult to see them. I dropped my kids off at school this morning and there was a parent, another mum, who was in tears because people are anxious, people are uncertain about what the future holds. Even children, particularly children. So yes, there is so much at stake.
Kylie Morris, she's going to be pursuing this one right up to the inauguration and beyond, and we'll be back tomorrow at 7. But for now, that is Channel 4 News. Good evening from Washington. Good night.